Why was he laughing at her? That was the first question that echoed through Anna Sharma's mind as the sun burned down on the California desert training ground, baking the dust into a hard crust beneath her boots. She wasn't new to insults, but something about the sergeant's voice, that booming, gravel-coated drawl cutting through the dry air, hit her deeper than usual. A corpsman, they sent me a librarian to fix my guys. The words rolled across the range like shrapnel, sharp and mocking. Laughter followed, nervous and uneven, the kind of laughter men use when they're not sure if they should be afraid or amused. Anna knelt on one knee beside a crate of medical gear, her head bent over a line of bandages, saline bags, and tourniquets. Her hands moved with methodical calm, fingers checking seals and expiration dates, reshuffling pouches until everything fit with surgical precision. She didn't look up, didn't answer. Her silence wasn't weakness, it was armor. Sergeant Rex Miller mistook it for defiance. He stood a few yards away, a wall of muscle and sweat-slicked bravado barking commands at his platoon of young Marines. Dust clung to their uniforms like a second skin, their faces streaked with grime and exhaustion. It was only training, a mass casualty simulation, but Miller treated every exercise like a war. His men mirrored his energy, his swagger, his loudness. Competence to Miller was a sound, the crack of orders, the stomp of boots, the roar of dominance. Anna, quiet and self-contained, was an offense to that philosophy. She could feel his shadow fall over her before he spoke again. "Hey, I'm talking to you, Doc," he sneered, spitting the nickname like an insult. "We're running a combat sim here, not a book club. You think you can drag a 200-pound Marine out of the line of fire? You look like a strong breeze would send you flying back to whatever library you checked out of." More laughter, this time confident, cruel. Anna fastened the last buckle on her pack, stood and faced him. Her eyes, dark, steady, unflinching, met his without a flicker of emotion. "Your men," she said softly, "will receive the best care I can provide, Sergeant." No anger, no tremor, just fact. Her calm made him angrier. To him, silence was submission and submission was weakness. He turned away, gesturing to his platoon with exaggerated exasperation. "You hear that, boys? The librarians got us covered. Let's hope none of you paperbacks get hurt." The laughter came again, loud and hollow. Anna didn't respond. She simply hoisted her pack, slung it over one shoulder, and walked toward her assigned position on the field. Every movement was deliberate, balanced, controlled, like she was trained for something beyond this, something none of them could see. In the command tower 200 yards away, Colonel Eva Rostova lowered her binoculars. She had been observing the drill, her expression detached, professional until that moment. There was something in the way the corpsman moved, a stance, a precision, the way she centered her weight before lifting the pack. It triggered an old, almost forgotten recognition deep in the colonel's chest. She'd seen that posture before. Not in medics fresh out of school. In operators. She watched a little longer, a subtle chill running through her gut. Back on the range, Sergeant Miller was barking again, his voice booming over the PA system. The Marines hustled into position for the next stage of the exercise. The air shimmered with heat. The metallic tang of sweat and gun oil hung heavy. Anna knelt beside her aid station, laying out the contents of her trauma kit on a tarp. She worked in silence, tuning out the noise, the shouting, the jokes, the bursts of mock gunfire. Around her, the chaos of simulated battle unfolded like theater. To the others, it was an adrenaline-fueled game. To her, it was muscle memory. Because she had lived the real thing. But no one here knew that. Her service record, as far as this base was concerned, painted her as a competent but unremarkable Navy corpsman reassigned from an overseas posting. A quiet billet, a break from deployments. No one had read the redacted pages. No one had seen the words classified theater or the commendations buried beneath black ink. She liked it that way. She wanted to disappear. But fate or irony had other plans. The first explosion was supposed to be part of the exercise. Controlled, predictable. The one that came was. It started as a deep, low whump that rolled across the desert floor, not the crisp thump of training charges. This sound had weight. It rattled ribs. It made the ground tremble. Then came the screech, the unmistakable metallic scream of concrete and steel collapsing. Every head snapped toward the source. The mock urban structure, a multi-story shell used for close-quarters training, shuddered, then buckled inward. A massive cloud of gray dust erupted skyward, swallowing everything in its path. For a single heartbeat, there was silence. Then came the screaming. The simulation was over. The real emergency had begun. Anna didn't wait for orders. She was already moving, her boots digging into the earth as she sprinted toward the rising dust cloud. Around her, Marines froze, their minds still lagging behind reality, struggling to process that this wasn't part of the drill. Someone yelled for medics. Someone else radioed command. But Anna didn't hear them. Her world narrowed to instinct. Each step landed with purpose. Her breathing slowed, not quickened. Her eyes scanned the chaos ahead, her brain calculating triage before she even arrived. She passed stunned Marines staggering away from the wreckage, faces cut and gray with dust. Some limped, some crawled. Others shouted names, searching for missing friends. The air was thick with panic. She pushed through. "Doc, over here," someone yelled. She reached the base of the collapsed structure, a jagged ruin of rebar and concrete slabs. Smoke curled upward from a crushed generator. The heat was suffocating. Anna dropped to her knees beside the first casualty she found, a young Marine clutching his chest, gasping. She tore open his vest, found the wound, sealed it with a compact occlusive patch and pressed a hand against his sternum. "Stay with me," she murmured, voice steady as stone. "You're okay. You're breathing. Good." She turned her head, scanning again. Another Marine crawled toward her, blood running down his arm. She barked a short, clear command to a bystander. "Hold pressure here. Elevate his legs. Keep talking to him." Her tone, calm, unwavering, cut through the hysteria like a lifeline. Men who had laughed at her minutes ago were now hanging on her every word. Then she heard it. A voice faint and broken from beneath the rubble. "Help, I'm pinned leg." Anna froze. The sound came from under a collapsed slab of concrete. She squinted through the haze. The voice was familiar. "Sergeant Miller." Without hesitation, she dropped her pack, sliding on her stomach through a narrow gap in the debris. Dust filled her lungs. Jagged edges tore at her sleeves. She ignored it. "Sergeant, it's Sharma," she called, crawling closer. "I'm coming to you." He was half buried, his lower body trapped beneath a block the size of a truck hood. His face was chalk-white, drenched in sweat. Blood pooled beneath him, dark and pulsing, too fast, too much. His femoral artery was severed. He had minutes, maybe less. Other Marines were trying to shift the slab, grunting, shouting orders. She knew they wouldn't move it in time. "Everyone back," she commanded, her quiet voice suddenly cutting through the chaos with startling authority. "Don't touch the slab, give me space." They obeyed instinctively now. Anna opened her pack. Her hands didn't shake, not once. She grabbed a hemostatic clamp, gauze, IV kit, morphine. Her mind was already ahead of her body. The wound was too high for a tourniquet. The only chance was a direct arterial clamp, brutal, invasive, something never taught in basic corpsman school. But she'd done it before. In places far from home. She slid her gloved hand deep into the mangled flesh of his thigh. Miller screamed, the sound raw, animal. She didn't flinch. She felt for the arterial pulse, the hot jet of life spilling out, and clamped it. The bleeding slowed. She leaned close to his face. "Stay with me, Sergeant. You're not done yet." His eyes met hers, wide with pain and disbelief. "Doc," he gasped, voice trembling. You're not supposed to know how to do that." She didn't answer. She inserted an IV, her needle finding the vein on the first try. Fluid flowed. She spoke softly to him, grounding him with her words. "Focus on my voice. Breathe. You're going to make it." Minutes blurred into an eternity. The crane arrived. Engineers rigged the slab. Sweat soaked through Anna's uniform, streaking with dust and blood. She stayed beside him the entire time, one hand on his pulse, the other keeping pressure. Her knees dug into gravel, but she didn't move. When the slab finally lifted and the medics swarmed in, she coordinated them like an officer. "Keep him flat, secure the leg, watch for shock." They carried him away. And only then, when the sound of the helicopter blades roared overhead, when Miller's stretcher disappeared into the med bay, did Anna let go. Her hands slackened. The world tilted. Her vision dimmed. The last thing she heard before the ground rose up to meet her was someone shouting her name. Then nothing. Darkness. The first thing she noticed was the sound. A soft, rhythmic beep, steady and patient like a metronome counting out borrowed time. Then came the smell of antiseptic, sharp, clean, familiar. Anna opened her eyes. The ceiling above her was white, too white. For a moment she didn't know where she was or when. There was only the blinding light pressing through the blinds and the faint hum of air conditioning. Her throat was dry, her body heavy, every muscle aching in ways that told her she'd pushed beyond her limits. She tried to sit up. "Easy, petty officer." The voice was low but firm, a woman's voice, command wrapped in calm. Anna turned her head. Colonel Eva Rostova stood near the window, the morning light casting a halo along the edges of her uniform. The colonel's eyes were sharp, the kind that saw everything, missed nothing, but right now they carried something else too. A softness, a quiet awe. "You're in the base medical center," Rostova said, stepping closer. "Dehydrated, exhausted, but you're going to be fine." Anna's lips parted, her voice weak. "Sergeant Miller." "He's in surgery." The colonel's expression softened. "He'll lose the leg, but he'll live. The surgeon said the only reason he made it here alive was because of you." Anna blinked slowly, letting the words settle. She should have felt relief. Instead, there was only that quiet, dull ache, the one that always came after the adrenaline burned out. "Thank you, ma'am," she murmured. Rostova studied her for a long moment. Then she crossed the room to a small table, picking up a manila folder. "I was in the command tower when it happened," the colonel said. "I saw the whole thing, the collapse, the panic, and you." Anna stayed silent. "The Marines couldn't stop talking about you afterward. They said you were calm, that you took control like you'd done it 100 times before." Anna looked down at her hands, scraped, bruised, bandaged. The skin beneath the gauze still stained faintly red. "I was just doing my job," she said softly. Rostova's gaze didn't waver. "No," she said, "you were doing something else entirely." She flipped open the folder. Papers rustled. The sound was oddly loud in the still room. "I pulled your record," the colonel said. "Or what's left of it. Your current command listed you as a standard corpsman, good record, multiple deployments. But most of the file is redacted. Entire pages blacked out." Anna's stomach tightened. "I have clearance," Rostova continued, "so I looked deeper." The silence stretched. The only sound was the steady monitor beside the bed. Finally, Rostova read aloud, her voice measured, deliberate. "Petty Officer 3rd Class Anna Sharma. Prior assignment, 1st Marine Raider Battalion MARSOC. Combat deployments, 3. Afghanistan, Iraq, and a classified theater in North Africa." Anna closed her eyes. The words stirred ghosts she'd buried long ago. Rostova went on, her tone quiet now, almost reverent. "Awards and commendations, Purple Heart, Bronze Star with Valor, Navy Cross." The room seemed to contract around them. The citation, Rostova said, glancing down at the paper again, for extraordinary heroism while serving as a Special Operations Corpsman. Under sustained enemy fire, Petty Officer Sharma rendered medical aid to multiple critically wounded raiders, coordinated a medevac under fire, and neutralized an enemy combatant at close range. The colonel looked up. "You never mentioned any of this." Anna's voice was barely above a whisper. It wasn't relevant. Rostova's brow furrowed. "Not relevant," she let out a quiet, disbelieving laugh. "You saved lives in a kill zone, you earned the Navy Cross, and you think that's not relevant?" Anna's eyes drifted toward the window. The blinds cut the sunlight into narrow golden bars across the sterile room. "I came here to train medics," she said, "not to be remembered." For a long moment, neither woman spoke. Then Rostova closed the folder with a soft thud and set it aside. She looked at Anna, really looked, and saw something beneath the calm surface. The fatigue of someone who had seen too much, lost too much, and carried it all in silence. "I think I understand," the colonel said finally. "You wanted a quiet billet, a chance to disappear." Anna's jaw tightened. "I just wanted to stop hearing the noise." Rostova nodded slowly. "War doesn't go quiet, does it?" Anna shook her head. "It echoes," she said. The colonel took a slow breath, letting that truth settle. "When the dust settled today," she said quietly, "I went down there myself. The Marines couldn't stop talking about you. They said you were the calm in the chaos. They said you didn't hesitate once." Anna's gaze fell back to her hands. The gauze wrapped around her fingers was already coming loose. She pulled at it absent-mindedly. "That's what training does," she said. "It replaces thought with action." "Or," Rostova countered, "it reveals who you really are when everything else breaks." The words hung in the air, gentle but unyielding. Anna didn't respond. She couldn't. There was nothing to say. A long pause followed, filled only by the faint hum of the fluorescent lights. Then quietly the colonel said, "What you did out there was more than just training. It was leadership, the kind that can't be taught in classrooms or manuals." She hesitated, her voice softening. "Do you realize what those Marines saw today? They saw strength, real strength, from someone they dismissed." Anna looked up then, her eyes distant. "I didn't do it to prove a point." "I know," Rostova said. "That's what makes it powerful." For a moment, they simply stood there, two women separated by rank but bound by understanding. Then the colonel's voice changed, quieter, almost fragile beneath the authority. "Petty officer," she said, "what you did today reminded me of something I'd forgotten. Years ago, I served with a field medic in Helmand Province. Small woman, barely 100 pounds soaking wet. But when things went bad, she was the one who held the line. I haven't seen that look, that kind of stillness, in anyone since." Anna met her gaze. "I don't think stillness is strength," she said. "It's just what's left after everything else burns away." The colonel's eyes softened. "Maybe, but it's the kind of strength the Corps needs." She picked up the folder again, hesitated, then set it down for good. "Get some rest," she said. "You've earned it." Rostova turned to leave. But just before she reached the door, Anna's voice stopped her. "Colonel." Rostova turned back. "Sergeant Miller," Anna said quietly. "He didn't deserve what happened." "No," Rostova agreed. "But life doesn't hand us justice. It hands us moments, and you made yours count." The colonel's hand rested briefly on the doorframe. "We'll talk again soon, Sharma." And then she was gone. Anna lay back, staring up at the ceiling. The rhythmic beeping filled the silence. Her heartbeat matched its pace. She closed her eyes. But rest wouldn't come, because she could still hear the screams, still feel the weight of Miller's blood against her hands, still see the flicker of disbelief in his eyes when he realized she was saving him, the same woman he'd mocked hours before. Sleep found her eventually, but it wasn't the kind that healed. It was the kind that drags you into the past. Sand, gunfire, the smell of iron. She was back there again, back in the ruins of a burned-out village in Afghanistan, the air thick with dust and diesel. She heard the thud of mortar rounds, the static hiss of broken comms. A man was screaming, her team leader. Her hands were red slick. She was clamping another artery just like today. Someone shouted for a medevac. Another said it was too late, but she didn't stop, couldn't. When she finally looked up, the helicopter was gone. The sky was gray with smoke, and she was alone with 3 bodies. That was the night she stopped believing that courage made you feel anything at all. She woke before dawn, sweat-soaked and trembling. The beeping monitor was gone. So was the IV. Someone had quietly disconnected her while she slept. A folded uniform sat on the chair beside her bed. Her name tag gleamed faintly in the dim light. There was a note pinned to it. Cleared for release, E. Rostova. Anna dressed slowly, her muscles still heavy, her movements deliberate. When she stepped out into the hallway, the early sunlight filtered through the frosted windows, painting long rectangles of gold on the floor. She expected quiet. Instead, she heard it, a murmur distant but growing. Voices, many of them. And then she saw the shadow of a formation through the glass doors ahead. Hundreds of silhouettes standing in perfect stillness on the parade ground. Her breath caught. She stepped outside and froze. 800 Marines stood in formation, stretching across the sun-drenched expanse of concrete. A sea of uniforms, motionless, eyes forward. At the front, in a wheelchair, sat Sergeant Rex Miller. His remaining leg was in a cast, his face pale but calm. Beside him, Colonel Rostova stood tall, her expression unreadable. The air was so still that Anna could hear the faint rustle of flags in the distance. She didn't understand, until the colonel's voice broke the silence. Battalion, attention. 800 pairs of boots slammed together in unison. The sound rolled like thunder across the base. Anna flinched. Her heart pounded once hard. She wanted to turn back, to disappear. But she couldn't move. Because in that moment, she realized something she had never expected. This wasn't for protocol. This was for her. She stood there frozen, unable to breathe. The sun was high now, a burning white disk cutting sharp reflections off 1,000 polished nameplates. The heat pressed against her skin, but she barely felt it. 800 Marines stood at attention in perfect rows. Faces she'd patched up, faces that had laughed at her, faces she didn't even know, all of them looking forward, unmoving. At the front, Colonel Rostova's voice carried like the echo of a drumbeat. "Petty Officer Sharma," she said, her tone steady but thick with something unspoken. "Front and center." Anna didn't move. Her pulse thudded in her ears. She wanted to sink into the concrete, to vanish the way she had learned to vanish in war zones, blending into the noise, into the dust. But silence demanded motion. So she stepped forward. Each stride sounded impossibly loud, the crunch of gravel under her boots punctuating the stillness. She walked between the ranks, the sea of Marines parting for her like a corridor of judgment. She didn't look at them, but she felt their eyes following her. Every footstep felt heavier than the last. When she reached the front, Colonel Rostova faced her. The colonel's eyes were steady, but her jaw was tight, emotion flickering beneath years of discipline. Then slowly, she raised her right hand in a salute. Perfect form, sharp, deliberate. It wasn't the salute of a superior officer to a subordinate. It was something else entirely, a gesture stripped of rank, stripped of protocol, a recognition of something deeper. A soldier saluting another soldier. The silence deepened. The sound of the world seemed to vanish, replaced by the faint rasp of wind and the steady hum of memory. For a long heartbeat, Anna didn't move. She didn't want this, didn't believe she deserved it. Then movement in the front row caught her eye. Sergeant Miller. He gritted his teeth, his muscles trembling as he pushed himself up from the wheelchair. The crutches under his arms wobbled. A ripple of motion went through the platoon, men instinctively stepping forward to steady him, but he shook his head. He stood on one leg, unsteady but unbroken. And he saluted. It wasn't perfect. His arm trembled, his face twisted in pain, but it was real. And that was what undid her. Her throat tightened, her vision blurred. For a long second, she couldn't lift her arm. Her mind flashed back to the rubble, to his blood, his screams, his disbelief as she clamped the artery that saved his life. She remembered the way he'd looked at her then, confusion fighting fear. And now that same man was saluting her. The one who'd called her a librarian. The one who'd laughed. Her hand came up at last, slow, steady, precise. The salute was crisp, clean, military to the bone. She held it. And in that wordless moment, every barrier, gender, rank, arrogance, doubt shattered. The colonel lowered her hand first, then turned toward her troops. The command came like thunder. Battalion, DISMISSED. The formation broke. Boots scuffed against concrete. The sound of motion returned like a wave, but not a single Marine moved toward the barracks. They moved toward her. Slowly, respectfully. One by one. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Some nodded. Some simply looked at her with eyes that said everything words couldn't. Miller was the last. He hobbled closer on his crutches, sweat beading on his forehead. When he stopped in front of her, he didn't try to joke, didn't even try to smile. "Doc," he said, voice rough, "thank you." Anna shook her head. "You don't owe me that." He met her gaze, the arrogance gone, replaced by something raw and human. "Yeah," he said quietly, "I do." They stood there for a moment in silence. Two people connected by pain, by blood, by something neither of them had wanted but both had earned. When he turned away, she exhaled, a slow, trembling breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The colonel approached, her expression softer now. "You handled that well," Rostova said. Anna gave a tired half-smile. "I almost ran." Rostova chuckled under her breath. That would have ruined the moment. "Moments are overrated," Anna said. "Maybe," the colonel replied, "but some define lifetimes." She looked out across the emptying parade ground. "You just changed this base, Sharma. You don't even realize it yet." Anna glanced toward the horizon, where the desert stretched out in endless heat shimmer. "Change doesn't last," she said. "It fades when the next noise comes along." Rostova looked at her for a long moment. "Then make sure the silence lasts longer." The story spread faster than any official report. By evening, it had already become legend. In the Chow Hall, Marines replayed the moment in hushed tones, arguing over who'd seen what, who'd stood closest. Some swore the colonel had tears in her eyes. Others said Miller nearly collapsed. But all of them agreed on one thing: the quiet corpsman had done something extraordinary. They no longer called her the librarian. They called her Doc Sharma now. Sometimes just the Doc. The nickname carried weight, like a title earned through blood. Anna didn't know what to do with that kind of attention. She'd never wanted it. Fame, even the kind born from respect, felt like a spotlight she couldn't stand beneath. The next morning, she tried to slip into the infirmary early, before anyone else arrived. The air was still cool, the hallways quiet. She found her workstation, her trauma bag still stained faintly red from the day of the collapse. She began cleaning it, every scalpel, every clamp, every gauze roll meticulously scrubbed, folded, arranged. Her hands moved by habit, but her mind wandered. She thought about Miller's face, about the way he'd looked at her, not as a superior, not as an equal, but as something in between, a person who had forced him to see his own reflection. She thought about the colonel, about the salute, and about the silence that had followed, a silence that had felt heavier than any applause. Her hands stopped moving. She stared at the tray of instruments. Was this what she'd been running from? Recognition. She didn't want to be a symbol. Symbols are easy to worship and impossible to live up to. She just wanted to work, to fix, to do the job. But now the job had changed. Every corpsman on base was watching her. Every Marine who'd laughed now looked at her differently. Respectfully, reverently. It was suffocating. By noon, Colonel Rostova called her in. The office was plain, maps on the walls, a framed citation above the desk, a single pot of coffee brewing quietly in the corner. "You should have taken another day," Rostova said as Anna stepped in. "You're barely recovered." "I needed to keep my hands busy," Anna replied. The colonel poured 2 cups of coffee, handed one over. "Word," reached Fleet Command, she said. "They want to issue a formal commendation." Anna's fingers tightened around the cup. "Please don't." Rostova raised an eyebrow. "You saved a man's life under real-world conditions. You maintained control of a mass casualty incident. That's commendation material." Anna shook her head. "That's what I'm trained to do, nothing more." Rostova leaned back, studying her. "You remind me of the old-school medics," she said. "The ones who thought medals were paperweights and recognition a distraction." "Maybe they were right." "Maybe," the colonel said quietly. "But people need examples, Sharma, especially now. You gave them one." Anna looked down, swirling the coffee in the cup. "They'll forget." Rostova smiled faintly. "No, they won't, not this." The room fell silent for a moment. The hum of the air conditioner filled the space between them. Then the colonel said, "Do you know what Sergeant Miller did this morning?" Anna shook her head. "He requested to address his platoon." Anna frowned. "He can barely stand." "He did it anyway," Rostova said. "Told them something worth remembering, that he'd been wrong about what strength looks like." Anna's eyes lifted. "He said that?" Rostova nodded. "He told them strength isn't volume or size, it's composure, competence, a 55 petty officer who doesn't flinch when the world collapses." For the first time since waking in the infirmary, Anna smiled, faintly but real. "People change," Rostova said softly. "Sometimes all it takes is one person willing to be silent long enough to show them how." Anna stared past her, through the window, at the line of desert hills shimmering in the heat. "Silence doesn't teach everyone," she said. "Some just fill it with noise." The colonel tilted her head. "Then keep showing them what silence can do." Anna didn't answer. She didn't have to. That night she sat outside the barracks alone, the desert wind cool against her skin. The stars above were sharp, endless, the kind of stars you only see far from cities and noise. She leaned forward, elbows on her knees, and breathed. She thought about the Marines, the ones who now saluted her, the ones who whispered her name like a story already turning into legend. She thought about the en bloc clamp she'd used on Miller, how someone had recovered it, cleaned it, and placed it on her desk that morning with a note. "For the doc." And for the first time, she didn't push the feeling away. Maybe this was what purpose felt like, quiet, unglamorous, heavy. She didn't need them to remember her name. Only the lesson. She whispered it to the night, almost like a prayer. Actions, not words. The wind caught the sound and carried it off into the dark. Somewhere inside the barracks, someone began telling her story again, a voice low and reverent, passing it to the next group of Marines who'd arrived that week. And the silence she'd created began to move through them like a quiet tide, reshaping everything it touched. The next morning broke with a silence that felt almost ceremonial. No shouting, no whistles, no barked orders, just the faint hum of desert wind sliding past the barracks. Anna was up before dawn. She always was. It was a habit she'd never unlearned, waking before the noise, before anyone could need her. The sunrise bled across the horizon, painting the sky in muted golds and rusted orange. She sat on the steps outside the infirmary, a cup of black coffee cooling in her hands, her gaze lost somewhere in the haze beyond the range. She liked mornings like this, the kind that pretended the world was still simple. The door creaked open behind her. A shadow stretched across the concrete. Couldn't sleep either. Anna didn't turn around. She didn't need to. The voice was unmistakable. Sergeant Rex Miller leaned against the doorway, his crutches balanced awkwardly under his arms. He looked smaller now. Not physically, his frame was still broad, his presence still heavy, but something inside him had changed. The air of arrogance that once followed him like smoke was gone. What was left was quieter, honest. Anna took a slow sip of coffee. Didn't think you'd be walking this soon. Not walking, he said, shifting his weight carefully. More like strategically wobbling. She smiled despite herself. It was faint, almost invisible, but it was there. You shouldn't be out here, she said. He exhaled, lowering himself onto the step beside her. The movement was stiff, painful, but deliberate. Yeah, the doc said that too. Anna arched a brow. I am the doc. He chuckled under his breath. Yeah, guess you are. For a while they just sat there, side by side in silence, watching the sunlight crawl across the parade ground. When he finally spoke again, his voice was quieter. I talked to the colonel yesterday, told her I wanted to speak to the platoon. Anna turned to him. You don't have to. I do, he said, cutting her off gently. I owe them that, I owe you that. She didn't answer. She just stared ahead, the rim of her coffee cup pressing against her lip. He rubbed his jaw, exhaling. You know, I've been trying to figure out why I treated you the way I did, why I thought it was okay to run my mouth. And the truth is, I don't even know. Maybe it was habit, maybe it was fear, maybe both. Anna said nothing. He went on. I spent years thinking strength was noise. You shout loud enough, no one notices how scared you are. You act tough, no one asks what's underneath. The confession hung in the air between them, raw and unguarded. You showed me something I didn't know existed, he said softly. That calm isn't weakness, it's control. Anna turned to look at him then. His eyes were steady, sincere. There was no trace of the man who'd once sneered across the training field. Sergeant, she said quietly, what happened to you? He shook his head. No, what happened because of me. You don't have to make excuses for it. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. There was nothing she could say that wouldn't sound like forgiveness and forgiveness. She wasn't sure she was ready to give. He looked away. I'll make it right. How? He hesitated. By changing what I teach. Later that morning, the platoon gathered on the same patch of dirt where everything had begun. The air was thick with anticipation, the silence heavy. Sergeant Miller stood before them, propped on his crutches, his prosthetic still weeks away. His uniform was immaculate, his voice steady when he spoke, but there was a tremor beneath it, the kind that comes from truth, not fear. Marines, he began, his tone stripped of bravado, I've been your instructor for 3 years. In that time, I've yelled more words at you than I care to count. Told you what strength looks like, what toughness sounds like. He paused, his gaze sweeping the line of young faces staring back. Turns out, I was only half right. The platoon shifted uneasily, unsure if this was a test. I used to think strength meant being the loudest voice in the room, Miller said. That leadership meant never backing down, never showing doubt. But 2 weeks ago, I met someone who changed all that. He took a slow, careful breath. You all saw her, you all laughed with me. You remember the words I used. No one spoke, a few lowered their eyes. She didn't yell back, he continued. Didn't try to prove herself, she just did the work. And when the world fell apart, when that structure came down, she was the first one there. The smallest person on the field carried the biggest weight. He paused, his voice catching slightly. She saved my life. The words landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples through every Marine in formation. She crawled through the rubble while the rest of us froze. She stopped the bleeding when I couldn't even feel my own leg. She didn't hesitate, didn't panic, didn't care that I was the one who mocked her. All she cared about was doing her job. The wind stirred, brushing dust across the parade deck. Miller's eyes hardened not in anger but conviction. That's strength. That's courage. It doesn't need to shout. It doesn't need to be seen. It just acts. And I failed to recognize it because I was too blind to see past my own noise. He looked across the line, his jaw tight. You will never make that mistake again. Not under my command. Not in my platoon. Silence. Then one by one the Marines straightened their posture, heads lifted, faces hardened with respect. Miller nodded once, dismissed. They didn't move. No one wanted to be the first to leave. The air hung heavy with something more powerful than discipline, understanding. Anna watched from a distance, unseen behind the shadow of the command building. She hadn't meant to listen. She'd just been walking by when his voice carried through the still air. But she stayed. Every word had hit like a pulse, not because of pride, but because it reminded her of something she'd forgotten, that people could change if you gave them silence long enough to hear themselves. When the formation finally broke, Miller caught sight of her. For a moment their eyes met across the courtyard. He didn't wave, didn't nod, just stood there, the faintest hint of a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth before he turned back to his men. She exhaled slow and deep, then turned away. Word spread fast again, but this time it wasn't gossip, it was reverence. Every corpsman on base suddenly found themselves treated differently. Doors that had been closed were opened. Respect that had to be earned twice as hard was now freely given. The quiet ones, the overlooked, the soft-spoken, the ones who blended into the background were being seen for the first time. In the infirmary, Anna noticed it immediately. Marines who once joked when they came in for minor injuries now stood a little straighter. They said, "Ma'am," without smirking. They watched her hands work, mesmerized by how something so calm could be so sure. It unsettled her at first. She wasn't used to being seen. She built a life on invisibility, a deliberate quiet meant to protect her from the noise of what came before. But this new attention wasn't noise. It was reflection. And maybe, she thought, that wasn't so bad. One evening, a group of young corpsmen approached her as she restocked medical kits. They looked nervous, shuffling on their feet like recruits unsure if they were allowed to speak. "Doc," one finally said, "we were wondering if you could show us how you set up your trauma kit." Anna looked at them. "You have the standard layout," she said. "Yeah," another said quickly, "but yours seems faster." She hesitated, then nodded, "All right." They gathered around as she unpacked her gear. She showed them how to fold the gauze for one-handed use, how to position clamps by muscle memory, how to angle syringes so they wouldn't roll in the dark. "Every second counts," she said quietly, "so you train until your hands remember what your mind can't." They watched, captivated. When she finished, one of them asked softly, "Were you scared that day?" Anna paused. Her fingers brushed the edge of the en bloc clamp, the same one she'd used on Miller. Someone had cleaned it, polished it, even mounted it in a shadow box near the infirmary wall. A small brass plaque sat beneath it. 3 words engraved in silence, actions, not words. She looked up. "Yes," she said finally, "I was terrified." The corpsmen exchanged surprised glances. Anna met their eyes, one by one. "Courage isn't about not feeling fear," she said. "It's about doing the job anyway." No one spoke after that. They didn't need to. Weeks passed, the base changed, the noise softened. Miller, now fitted with a prosthetic, began walking again slowly, carefully, but the swagger never returned. He carried himself differently now, not louder, just steadier. He started mentoring the quiet ones, the Marines who hung back during drills, the ones who hesitated to speak up. He'd pull them aside, his voice low. "Don't mistake silence for weakness," he'd say. "That's the sound of someone thinking." He began taking new NCOs out to the training field, standing them on the same patch of ground where the collapse had happened. He called it Sharma's Point. There he'd tell the story, not for drama, not for inspiration, but for truth. He'd end every talk the same way. Strength isn't how loud you shout. It's how long you can stay calm when everything else falls apart. And across the base, that idea, that quiet strength, began to spread like wildfire. Anna never asked for any of it, but every time she walked past that plaque in the infirmary, every time she saw a young corpsman standing a little taller, she felt something stir inside her chest. Not pride. Something simpler. Peace. It started small, just whispers passed between bases, between units. A story that sounded too perfect to be true, a training accident, a collapse, a corpsman who'd crawled through rubble and saved a man who'd mocked her hours before. Most stories like that burn bright and die fast. This one didn't. It spread through the ranks like an ember that refused to go out. They called it the librarian story at first, the myth of a quiet medic who humbled a platoon. Then someone learned her real name, and the title changed. Now it was Doc Sharma's lesson. And it had weight. Colonel Rostova didn't plan for it to become doctrine. But when she saw what it was doing, how it softened arrogance and reshaped leadership without a single formal directive, she knew it needed to be preserved. She began including it in her seminars for young officers. She never dramatized it. She never said names beyond the ones already known. She just told it like it was, a simple story about prejudice, professionalism, and the power of restraint. She'd begin every session the same way. Competence, she'd say, is quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It waits for the moment it's needed, and when that moment comes, it doesn't miss. Then she described that day, the collapse, the silence, the salute. And when she reached the part about the 800 Marines standing at attention, the room always went still. Even the cockiest young officers leaned forward, caught between disbelief and reverence. And when it ended, Rostova would close her notes and look them in the eye. "If you remember anything from this story," she'd say, "remember this. The strongest person in the room is often the one who doesn't need to prove it." It became a phrase etched in minds, repeated in classrooms and training manuals, until it took on a life of its own. For Anna, the spread of the story felt surreal. She hadn't asked for it, hadn't even known it was happening until one afternoon a young Marine at the Chow Hall stopped her mid-step and said quietly, "Thank you, Doc." She blinked. For what? The Marine just smiled. For the lesson. Then he walked away. After that, it happened more often. People she'd never met nodded respectfully when she passed. A salute held an extra beat. A voice softened when they said her name. It unsettled her at first. Then it humbled her. Then slowly, it began to heal something she didn't know was still broken. Because for years, she'd carried the quiet guilt of surviving when others hadn't. And now that same silence, the one she'd once used to hide, was giving others a voice. One evening, Colonel Rostova called her to the officers' club. Anna hesitated at the door. The place was usually off-limits for enlisted personnel unless formally invited. But the colonel's word was law, and when she said, "Come at 1900, dress uniform," you didn't ask why. Inside, the air was warm, heavy with the scent of old whiskey and polished wood. Portraits of commanders lined the walls, their eyes watching like silent witnesses to history. A single photograph stood out, newly framed, mounted near the entrance. Anna stopped. It was a picture of the parade ground, Rostova mid-salute. And in front of her, half-turned, sunlight catching the corner of her face, Anna herself. She hadn't known the photo existed. For a moment, she just stared at it. Not with pride, but with disbelief. Rostova appeared beside her, I thought it deserved a place, she said quietly. Anna swallowed. You didn't have to. The colonel shook her head. This isn't about you or me. It's about what that moment stood for. Anna turned toward her, and what was that? Rostova's expression softened. Respect. Earned, not given. The kind of respect that reminds people the uniform doesn't make the person makes the uniform. Anna looked back at the photo, her reflection ghosting faintly over it. Feels strange, she said, being on that wall. You belong there, Rostova said simply. Anna didn't answer, she couldn't. Rostova gestured toward the bar, where a few officers were gathered, quiet murmurs filling the space. Come on, she said. There's something I want you to hear. Anna followed, her steps hesitant. At the center table sat Gunnery Sergeant Miller. His prosthetic rested neatly beside his crutches, his uniform pressed sharp. When he saw her, he straightened, smiling in a way that was still new, humble, grateful, human. Doc, he said, glad you made it. She nodded, you look better. Thanks to you. Don't start, she warned lightly. He laughed, all right, all right. The colonel took her seat, motioned for them both to sit. The air felt heavier here, charged with something unspoken. Rostova cleared her throat. The commandant reached out, she said. Word, gone far. Fleet Command wants to make the incident part of the new leadership curriculum. Anna frowned. Curriculum. Case study in combat readiness and ethics. They want to use your story to teach command climate. Anna's chest tightened. That's unnecessary, it's over. On the contrary, Rostova said, it's just beginning. Miller nodded in agreement. She's right, Doc. I've been here 12 years, never seen a base change like this. The noise died down, the respect went up. You don't undo something like that. Anna looked between them, the colonel, the Marine whose life she'd saved, and felt the strange weight of legacy pressing on her shoulders. I don't want people romanticizing it, she said. What happened was chaos, messy, ugly, he almost died. And that's exactly why it matters, Rostova said softly. Because it was real, not polished, not planned. Real leadership doesn't happen in speeches, it happens in moments of instinct. Anna's voice grew quieter. And what if I don't want to be remembered? The colonel smiled sadly. You don't get to choose that, petty officer. The room fell silent. The sound of a clock ticking somewhere behind the bar filled the air. Finally, Miller broke it. You know, Doc, when I was lying under that slab, I wasn't afraid of dying. I was ashamed. Ashamed because I realized I'd built my whole career on noise, and when it mattered, it was your silence that saved me. Anna looked away. Don't make me the hero in your story, Sergeant. I'm not, he said quietly. You already were. She blinked hard. The words hit deeper than she wanted them to. The colonel raised her glass, breaking the tension. To the quiet professionals, she said. Miller followed. To the ones who don't need to shout. Anna hesitated, then lifted her own glass. To the ones who show up when it counts. They drank in silence. Weeks turned into months. The seasons shifted. The story of Doc Sharma became institutional folklore, passed through training manuals, leadership lectures, and whispered conversations in dusty outposts halfway across the world. Anna, meanwhile, returned to her work. She trained new corpsmen, perfected protocols, and kept her hands busy. It was easier that way, to stay moving, to let purpose drown out the noise of recognition. But she couldn't escape it entirely. One afternoon, she walked into the infirmary to find a group of recruits standing by the shadow box that held her en bloc clamp. They were quiet, reading the brass plaque beneath it. Actions, not words. One of them turned as she entered. Doc, he said quickly, standing at attention. We didn't mean. It's all right, she interrupted softly. Go ahead, look. They relaxed, gathering around as she joined them. She stared at the clamp, still gleaming faintly under the fluorescent light, and felt a pang of something indescribable. Miller's blood had stained that metal once. Now it was polished clean, but the memory was. One of the recruits, a young woman barely out of boot camp, looked up at her. "Ma'am, did it really happen like they say?" Anna smiled faintly. "Depends what they say." "That you didn't hesitate, that you just acted." Her eyes softened. "I hesitated 1,000 times," she said. "You just couldn't see it." The recruits exchanged glances, unsure if she was being humble or honest. Anna leaned closer, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "You'll understand one day. Fear never disappears. It just learns where to stand." The young woman nodded slowly, her expression shifting, all melting into quiet determination. As they left, Anna stayed behind, staring at the plaque a moment longer. Then she whispered to the empty room, "Stay quiet, stay ready." That night Rostova walked the base alone, the sky streaked with silver clouds. She paused near the training grounds, Sharma's point now, though unofficially. The wind had shifted, carrying a chill from the mountains. She thought about the way things had changed since that day, how arrogance had thinned, how respect had taken root. Change, she realized, wasn't loud. It was gradual, patient, like erosion. It started as a story, then a habit, then a culture. And it all began with one woman who refused to raise her voice. Rostova smiled faintly, looking out across the dark range. "Competence waits for its moment," she murmured to herself. Then she turned and walked back toward the lights of the command building. Behind her, the desert wind whispered softly across the dust, carrying with it the faintest echo of that long-ago salute, the sound of 800 boots snapping together, not for glory, but for grace. The orders came in quietly, the way all important things do. No ceremony, no meeting, just an envelope. It was slipped under her door sometime before dawn, the sound of paper brushing concrete the only announcement. She found it when she woke, folded perfectly, her name typed in small, precise letters across the front. Petty Officer 3rd Class ANA SHARMA. Reassignment classified. No explanation, no destination, just coordinates, clearance codes, and a reporting date. Tomorrow. She stared at the paper for a long time. Not with surprise, she'd always known this would happen eventually, but with that old, dull ache that came when life moved on before she was ready. She sat on the edge of her bunk, uniform half-buttoned, sunlight leaking through the narrow blinds. The base outside was already stirring. Distant shouts from morning PT, the rhythmic thump of boots, the echo of whistles. Routine, discipline, noise. And she'd be gone from it soon. For most, that would be an honor. A classified reassignment meant trust, meant significance. For Anna, it just meant returning to the shadows she'd worked so hard to leave. She folded the paper, slid it into her breast pocket, and stood. One more day, that's all she had left here. By mid-morning, she made her way to the infirmary, her domain, her refuge. The smell of antiseptic and coffee greeted her like an old friend. Everything was in order just as she liked it. Supplies aligned, gear sterilized, instruments laid out with surgical precision. She ran her hand over the counter, tracing the faint scratches on the metal surface, marks from the hundreds of hours she'd spent here, teaching, patching, preparing. Her gaze landed on the shadow box mounted on the wall. The en bloc clamp gleamed beneath the fluorescent light, the small brass plaque catching a glint of morning gold. Actions, not words. She smiled faintly. "Take care of them," she whispered to it, as if the words could somehow stay behind. The door opened softly behind her. "I was hoping I'd find you here," came a familiar voice. Anna turned. Sergeant Rex Miller stood in the doorway, or rather, Gunnery Sergeant Miller now. His new rank insignia was still sharp on his collar, the stripes fresh, unweathered. His prosthetic clicked faintly against the floor as he stepped in, steady but still cautious. "Gunnery Sergeant," she said with the hint of a smile. "Congratulations." He grinned. "You heard." Hard not to. The base is quieter now, but not that quiet. He chuckled, then his expression softened. Heard about your orders. Of course you did, she said lightly. News travels faster than truth around here. He didn't smile this time. You're really going? She nodded. Tomorrow. Do I get to know where? You don't, she said simply. He nodded slowly, accepting it without protest. Figures. You always were good at disappearing. She looked down at her hands, folded neatly on the counter. It's part of the job. No, he said, voice low. It's part of who you are. She didn't argue. He stepped closer, pulling a small box from his pocket. Before you go, he said, placing it on the counter, the guys wanted you to have this. Anna hesitated, then opened it. Inside was a simple brass tag, the kind used for dog tags, but unmarked by serial numbers. Instead, 3 words were engraved into the surface, polished clean. Stay quiet, stay ready. She traced the letters with her thumb. Was that your idea? She asked. Miller smiled faintly. No, it was the new recruits. Said they wanted something to carry forward, something that reminded them of the doc who didn't need to yell to be heard. Her throat tightened. She closed the box gently. Tell them thank you. I will. They stood there for a moment, the silence between them deep but comfortable, the kind forged in respect, not avoidance. Miller exhaled softly. I never said goodbye right the first time. She tilted her head. Most people don't. He smiled, eyes glinting. Then I'll try again. Goodbye, Doc. Goodbye, Gunny. He turned to leave, pausing at the doorway. You changed more than this place, you know. Did I? She asked quietly. He nodded. Yeah, you changed me. And for someone like me, that's damn near impossible. Before she could respond, he was gone, his steps fading into the corridor. Anna stood still, the small brass tag cold in her palm, the weight of his words heavier than any metal. Colonel Rostova found her later that afternoon. The colonel's office was bathed in late sunlight, maps and mission briefs scattered across her desk. She looked up as Anna entered, and for a moment the steel in her eyes softened. So it's true, Rostova said. You're being pulled back in. Anna nodded. Orders came through this morning. The colonel sighed, leaning back in her chair. I should have known they wouldn't let you stay hidden for long. It was a good run, Anna said quietly. Rostova studied her, fingers steepled beneath her chin. You don't sound happy about it. Anna hesitated. Happiness isn't part of the job description. No, Rostova said softly, but peace should be. Anna looked out the window. The desert beyond was calm, the horizon burning with the gold of a dying sun. Peace doesn't last, she said. It waits, then it gets interrupted. The colonel's lips twitched, a faint, sad smile. And yet you keep running toward the interruption. Anna turned back to her. Someone has to. Rostova rose from her chair, walking around the desk. For a moment she just stood there, studying Anna the way a commander studies a departing soldier she knows she'll never see again. You've done something here that I couldn't do with 100 orders, she said. You changed the culture without saying a word. I didn't change it, Anna said softly. They did, I just reminded them how. Rostova smiled faintly. You'll deny it until the end, won't you? Anna's expression didn't change. Denying it keeps it real. The colonel extended her hand. Then let's at least make this goodbye official. Anna hesitated, then took it. Rostova's grip was firm, warm. When the colonel finally released it, her voice dropped to a whisper. Wherever you're going, whatever shadow they send you into, don't lose the quiet. It's your weapon. Anna nodded once. Yes, ma'am. Rostova's gaze softened. Fair winds, petty officer. Anna turned to leave. At the door she paused. Ma'am. Yes. If anyone asks what happened here, tell them it was just another day. The colonel smiled. You really hate credit, don't you? I don't hate it, Anna said, glancing back with a ghost of a smile. I just don't need it. Then she was gone. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Anna walked the perimeter of the base one last time. The air was cool, the desert wind sharp with sand. The training ground lay silent, the same ground where everything had changed. She stopped at the edge of Sharma's Point. The cracked concrete still bore faint scorch marks from the collapse. Someone had placed a small wooden marker there, barely visible against the fading light. It read simply, "Respect is earned in silence." Anna knelt beside it, brushing dust from the inscription. For a long time she just sat there, the wind tugging gently at her hair, the horizon bleeding red and gold. In the distance, she could hear evening formation, boots striking the ground in rhythm, voices rising in cadence, the same sound that had once defined her world. She closed her eyes, listening. Not with sadness, but with gratitude. The sound wasn't noise anymore. It was order, harmony. The kind built on understanding. When she finally stood, the stars had begun to emerge, faint glimmers against the deepening sky. She took one last look at the base, memorizing its silhouette. The towers, the barracks, the infirmary light glowing soft through its windows. Then she turned toward the gate. A single duffel slung over her shoulder. No escort, no ceremony, just her and the night. A truck waited near the checkpoint, its engine idling quietly. The driver, a young Marine, saluted as she approached. "Ma'am," he said respectfully. "Petty officer," she corrected automatically, climbing in. "Yes, ma'am," he said again, smiling nervously. She didn't correct him a second time. As the truck rolled out, she looked back one final time. The base receded into the distance, lights shimmering faintly through the dust. It was over. But somewhere deep inside, she knew it wasn't the end. Not really. Because silence like hers doesn't fade. It lingers. It teaches. It becomes part of the air long after the person who carried it is gone. Colonel Ristova stood at her office window that night, watching the headlights disappear down the long desert road. She didn't move for a long time. When the truck vanished into the darkness, she exhaled softly, her voice almost a whisper. "Fair winds, Doc." Behind her, the photo on the wall caught the light, that immortal moment on the parade deck. Two figures locked in salute, surrounded by a sea of silent reverence. The reflection of it shimmered faintly in the window glass, overlaying the stars outside. And for the first time in years, the colonel felt something rare, a quiet certainty that some stories don't need endings. They just echo. No one ever saw the truck return. Some said it went straight to the airfield outside the desert perimeter, that she boarded a transport plane under a moonless sky and disappeared east. Others swore they saw her at the docks 2 days later, walking up the gangway of a Navy vessel that wasn't listed on any manifest. No one knew for sure. All they knew was that Petty Officer 3rd Class Anna Sharma, Doc Sharma, was gone. And that was how legends begin. Weeks passed. The base fell back into rhythm. The cadence of training, the clang of rifle bolts, the thrum of discipline returning to the surface. But something had changed quietly, invisibly, profoundly. You could feel it in the way Marines spoke to corpsmen now. The way instructors paused before dismissing the quiet ones. The way even the loudest drill sergeants lowered their voices when they passed Sharma's Point. That stretch of scorched concrete had become something like sacred ground. New recruits would be brought there on their first week, not as part of official training, but because someone in the chain of command always made sure it happened. They'd stand in silence, staring at the plaque nailed to the bent support beam. Respect is earned in silence. Then a sergeant, usually Miller, would tell the story. Not with theatrics, not with fanfare, just the truth. He'd tell them about the collapse, the panic, the dust and screaming, the woman who didn't wait for permission. the doc who crawled into the wreckage alone, and the 800 Marines who stood at attention for her 2 days later. Every word of it was delivered in that steady, low-tone soldiers use when they talk about the things that matter, the things that haunt them and hold them together all at once. And the recruits listened wide-eyed because they could feel it. They could see it. The weight of it was real even if she wasn't there. By the time Miller finished, he always ended the same way. Don't mistake quiet for weakness. Don't ever mistake calm for fear. And if you meet someone who reminds you of her, someone who just does their job without noise, pay attention. That's what strength looks like. Then he'd salute the plaque, and the recruits would follow, a sea of young hands raised to an empty patch of air. It wasn't protocol, it was belief. But outside that desert base, something else was happening. Her name, whispered in briefings, retold in mess halls, began traveling. Someone at Fleet Command had circulated a training memo titled Case Study 19A, the Sharma Incident. It was meant for internal leadership review, a confidential debrief, but within weeks it leaked, not maliciously, just the way stories travel in places where truth needs to survive the paperwork. Soon it was everywhere, sanitized, anonymized, yet instantly recognizable. Across Navy hospitals and Marine bases, officers began using it in ethics seminars. Remember the corpsman who stayed calm under pressure, they'd say. Remember the one who turned mockery into honor. And slowly the myth grew. At first it was faithful to the truth. Then, as stories do, it started to evolve. Some versions said she'd carried the sergeant out herself. Others said she'd performed surgery on him with a field knife. A few swore she'd kept him alive for hours using only duct tape and sheer will. It didn't matter that most of it wasn't true. What mattered was what it meant. Because every version, every retelling carried the same core message. That strength doesn't shout. That competence doesn't need witnesses. That respect is earned in silence. And in an institution built on hierarchy and noise, that message spread like a quiet rebellion. Months later, a rumor started circulating, the kind that lives between truth and superstition. Someone said they'd seen her again. A Navy flight medic in Bahrain claimed she'd been reassigned to a Black Ops medical unit, codenamed Vigil. He said she'd patched up SEALs in the middle of a nighttime extraction, her face hidden under a dust mask, her eyes calm as ever. A Marine in Somalia swore she'd seen her on a tarmac during an emergency evacuation, handing off wounded soldiers before disappearing into a waiting Osprey. A contractor in Eastern Europe said he'd heard a woman's voice over encrypted comms, low, deliberate, unmistakably hers, giving triage orders in the middle of an ambush. None of the reports were confirmed. All of them felt true. And in military folklore, that's enough. Before long, her call signs started appearing on whiteboards in ready rooms and med tents around the world. Not officially, but written in dry erase marker next to mission plans or supply lists. Doc SHARMA protocol, shorthand for composure under chaos. It became a phrase among medics: stay quiet, stay ready. The motto spread faster than any directive could. Back on the base, Gunnery Sergeant Miller kept the story alive in his own way. He started leading weekend field clinics for the new corpsmen, helping them build physical strength, endurance, and confidence. But every session ended the same way, with a moment of silence. Don't just train your muscles, he'd tell them. Train your breath, that's what she did. That's what saved me. Sometimes when the recruits were gone, he'd walk to Sharma's point alone. He'd lean on his prosthetic, the desert wind brushing past, and think about that day, the dust, the pain, her steady hands. He'd think about the way she'd looked at him afterward. Not with judgment, not with pity, just that calm, unshakable professionalism that said, "This is what we do." And sometimes quietly he'd whisper, "Thank you." No one heard, but maybe she did. Colonel Rostova, meanwhile, had been promoted. Her leadership program, built around the Sharma case study, had been adopted across the Corps. She was invited to speak at academies, conferences, command summits, and every time she stood at a podium, she carried the same story with her. Not as a legend, as a mirror. She'd look out at rooms full of officers and say, "When you command others, remember this. You don't earn respect by speaking first. You earn it by being the person who doesn't panic when everyone else does." Then she'd pause. And if you're ever lucky enough to serve alongside someone like her, someone who reminds you what humility looks like, listen to them. In one of those lectures, an officer once asked, "Ma'am, what happened to her?" Rostova smiled faintly. She went where the quiet professionals always go, somewhere no one can see until they're needed. Months turned into a year. Then one night, far away, halfway across a forgotten desert, a Black Hawk helicopter took heavy fire during extraction. The comms chatter was chaos. Static, shouting, the clipped tension of soldiers trying to hold it together. Through the noise came a calm female voice. "Stabilize pressure, clamp artery, morphine 0.5, no not yet, breathe with him, focus." The pilot later swore that voice was the only reason they didn't lose the wounded men. When they landed, she was gone. All that remained was a single tag, wedged between bloodied equipment in the cabin. "Stay quiet, stay ready." The recovery team brought it back to base, thinking it was a message, a coincidence. But word spread. And suddenly, everyone was asking again if Doc Sharma was still out there. No one could prove it. No one could disprove it either. And that was enough for the story to keep breathing. Back at her old base, the traditions continued. The plaque still gleamed. The new recruits still stood in silence each Friday morning facing Sharma's point. The words never changed. Respect is earned in silence. But sometimes, if you were there at dawn, when the wind blew just right and the sun hit the horizon, it almost felt like you could hear her boots in the dust. A soft, steady rhythm cutting through the quiet. A reminder that competence doesn't die. It just moves on. One evening, years later, Colonel Rostova returned. She was older now, her hair streaked with gray, her posture still straight as a rifle barrel. The base had changed, but Sharma's point was still there, untouched. A new generation of Marines trained on that ground now, their laughter ringing across the same desert. Rostova walked to the edge of the concrete, kneeling beside the marker. Her fingers brushed the words, tracing the grooves. She closed her eyes and whispered, "We kept your silence alive." The wind answered with a low hum, carrying sand and memory alike. And for a fleeting second, she thought she heard a voice, distant, steady, familiar. "Stay quiet, stay ready." She smiled. And somewhere, halfway across another continent, a medic with calm eyes and a silent purpose pressed her hands to another wound, another soldier, another life, still doing the job no one else could. Still unseen. Still the same. Because true strength doesn't retire. It just changes uniforms. The night she left her last base was colder than anyone remembered. A thin layer of fog rolled through the desert, softening the edges of the barracks and hiding the stars. The silence was heavy, familiar, almost kind. Anna walked alone, one hand brushing the faded canvas of her duffel bag, the other tucked in the pocket of her jacket. No one saw her go, but everyone felt it. Even years later, they would say that something in the air changed that night. The sound of boots in formation seemed quieter, the salutes sharper, the wind slower. It was as if the entire base was holding its breath. She didn't look back. There was no need. Some goodbyes don't need witnesses. They reassigned her to a unit so deep in the black that even the officers who signed her clearance didn't know where the orders came from. Officially, it didn't exist. Unofficially, it was the last line between chaos and silence. Codename Vigil. No insignias, no ranks, just call signs and pulse rates. Their job wasn't combat, it was recovery, extraction, stabilization. The kind of work no one bragged about because no one was supposed to know it happened. They operated in the shadows of disaster zones, in collapsed tunnels, in the aftermath of things the world would never see on the news. And Anna fit perfectly. Her quiet wasn't a mask anymore, it was a language. The team learned it quickly, how a single nod from her meant move, how her breath slowing meant wait, how the calm in her voice could stop panic in its tracks. They called her Echo, because she never spoke unless she had to. And when she did, her words stayed. On a mission in the mountains 3 years later, her silence saved 12 people. A compound had collapsed after a shelling strike, half a dozen soldiers and 6 civilians trapped under concrete and dust. When the radio died and the engineers froze, she went in alone, crawling through a space barely wider than her shoulders, guided only by the sound of breathing somewhere ahead. It took 10 hours. Her uniform tore, her hands bled, her lungs burned, but when they pulled her out, every trapped soul was alive. A photographer captured a single image, her face streaked with soot, her eyes half open, exhausted. She wasn't posing. She didn't even know he'd taken it. Weeks later, that photo appeared anonymously in a classified internal bulletin. No name, no caption, just a line beneath it. Silence is not absence. After that, rumors became gospel. Everywhere she went, stories followed, some real, some not. People said she could hear a heartbeat through concrete, that she once kept a dying man alive by singing under her breath until rescue came, that she'd refused 3 commendations because medals made noise. And through all of it, she remained the same, steady, invisible, dedicated. She never corrected the stories. She never denied them either. Because it wasn't about her, it never was. The years took their toll. Her body began to carry the weight her voice never did. Scar tissue, fractures, the slow stiffness of too many nights spent in cold dust and tight corners. She never complained, but the team saw it, the way she winced when she stood, the faint tremor in her fingers before she steadied them. Then one night, on a mission in an abandoned industrial city, she collapsed mid-rescue. It wasn't dramatic. No explosion, no blood, no chaos, just silence. She had carried a wounded man through the wreckage and set him down beside the evac chopper. Then her knees buckled, her hand caught air, and she crumpled as if the weight of every saved life had finally found her bones. They airlifted her back to base. She woke 2 days later in a field hospital, an IV in her arm, the hum of machines surrounding her. Her commanding officer, a quiet, soft-spoken woman named Captain Alana Reyes, sat beside her bed. "You're done," Reyes said gently. Anna blinked, "Done. Your body says so. Your service record doesn't owe you anything more." Anna looked at the ceiling, the faint flicker of the fluorescent light. "I'm not finished." Reyes smiled faintly. "You're allowed to rest." Anna turned her head. "Rest is for the ones who stop caring." Reyes sighed. "Then at least slow down, let the world catch up." Anna closed her eyes. The world never does. For the next 6 months, she stayed off duty, technically retired, unofficially still working in medical consultation. She trained new medics, taught field response to officers who thought heroism was louder than competence. They learned quickly that she didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. A single look from her carried the authority of 100 orders. When she corrected someone, it was never harsh. Just precise, controlled quiet. And that quiet made them better. One afternoon, Captain Reyes found her sitting alone near the airfield, the sun low and red. Anna had a notebook open in her lap, her handwriting small and measured. Reyes asked softly, "What are you writing?" "Instructions," Anna said. For what? For whoever comes next. Reyes hesitated. You think they'll listen? Anna smiled faintly. They'll listen to the silence between the lines. Reyes studied her for a long moment, then asked, do you ever think about the day it started? The collapse, the salute? Anna's eyes flickered. I think about the dust, the noise, the hands I couldn't save. You saved plenty. She shook her head slowly. It's never about how many you save. It's about who you become after the ones you don't. Reyes didn't respond. She didn't need to. The truth was sitting right there in front of her. The kind of truth you don't argue with, you just learn from it. When Anna finally left the service, she didn't announce it. She didn't attend her own farewell ceremony. She simply turned in her badge, signed her discharge papers, and walked out with the same quiet she'd walked in with years before. She moved to a small town near the coast, a place where the sea spoke in low rhythms and no one asked for her name. She rented a room above a clinic, offered free treatment to the locals, and lived simply. In the mornings, she watched the tide roll in. In the evenings, she wrote. Not about war, not about missions, about people, their small pains, their resilience, the moments no one saw but everyone felt. One winter evening, years later, she sat by her window as rain whispered against the glass. A candle burned beside her, its flame swaying with each gust of wind. She'd been feeling weaker lately. The doctor said her heart had grown tired. She didn't argue. There are some things you don't fight. You just meet them standing still. Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted her pen, finishing one last sentence in her notebook. Then she closed it gently, placing it on the table beside her brass tag, the one engraved years ago. Stay quiet, stay ready. She smiled at it, almost amused. Then softly she whispered, I'm ready. The candle flickered once and went out. 2 days later, Captain Reyes arrived. She received a letter from Anna weeks earlier, short, handwritten. No return address, just a line that said, if this reaches you, thank you for letting me disappear the right way. Reyes stood in the small coastal room, sunlight filtering through the curtains, everything neat and untouched. On the desk lay the notebook. She opened it. Inside were pages of observations, lessons, thoughts, fragments. Not a memoir, not orders, just truths written like confessions. The loudest thing in the world is fear. Mercy is not weakness, it's control. Every hand you save leaves a weight. Carry it gently. And at the very end, if they remember me, let it be as the one who stayed calm when it mattered. That's enough. Reyes closed the book, her throat tightening. She looked around the room, simple, silent, peaceful. There was no sadness, just stillness. The kind of stillness that meant mission complete. Word of her passing didn't travel fast. It wasn't broadcast or recorded. But it didn't need to. Within weeks, every medic she'd ever trained heard it through the invisible channels that connect people who serve in silence. A corpsman in Okinawa placed a small brass tag on his locker. A flight medic in Syria painted "Stay Ready" on her helmet. An officer at Quantico quoted her line in a speech and didn't mention her name, but everyone in the room knew who he meant. Across branches, her legend quietly reignited. Not with noise, with stillness. 10 years later, at a new Marine training facility, recruits gathered at dawn in front of a statue. It wasn't large. No weapons, no dramatic pose, just a figure kneeling, hands outstretched, not in prayer but in aid. At the base, a plaque read, Petty Officer ANA SHARMA. Doc SHARMA. Respect is EARNED in silence. And below it, smaller, the words she'd once whispered. Stay quiet, stay ready. The instructor called for a moment of silence. The recruit stood still, boots lined, eyes forward. Somewhere in that crowd, a young woman, newly assigned as a corpsman, felt her chest tighten. She didn't know the whole story yet, but something in the air told her she would. She whispered under her breath, "I'll make you proud." The instructor heard, smiled, and said softly, "That's the point." Later that evening, after the ceremony, the sun dipped low, painting the sky gold. Captain Alana Reyes, older now, her hair streaked silver, stood alone by the statue. She carried the same notebook Anna had written all those years ago. It was worn, pages creased, edges frayed. She placed it at the base of the monument, resting her palm against the cold bronze. "Mission complete, Doc," she whispered. The wind moved softly through the training grounds, rustling the flags and lifting sand from the earth. For a moment, it sounded almost like footsteps. Almost like her. Night fell slowly. The base lights flickered on one by one, stretching long shadows across the desert. Somewhere, far beyond that horizon, another generation of soldiers was training. Another medic was learning to steady her hands. Another officer was remembering the story of the woman who never raised her voice. And in that repetition she lived. Not in marble, not in memory. In the rhythm of breathing under pressure. In the pause before panic. In the unspoken bond between those who serve and those who save. Her silence had become doctrine. Her calm an inheritance. Her absence a presence that would never fade. If you listen closely, you can still hear her. In the hum of the med tent before dawn. In the hush between gunfire and heartbeat. In the small, steady voice that says, "You're all right, I've got you." Because heroes like Anna Sharma don't vanish. They dissolve into the world they saved. They become the stillness before courage. And when history speaks, it will not shout her name. It will whisper it. Soft, certain, eternal. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.